Mediopolis, Chapter 11. The Show Strange World. Show Strange World. Aunt Tora finally arrives with the entourage. Aunt Tora had arrived to the family show with her assistants carrying her heavy, colourful bags, and there were many of those bags. There were a couple following her into the little sister's house, pulling along the long, winding train of bags. The train of bags were all connected in a long, winding train carriage, with one suitcase on its wheels attached to the suitcases on their wheels behind. The long row of bags were trained along, zigzagging up the garden path, wheeling their way into the kitchen door and around the house. The elderly man was amazed at just how many large travel bags there really were, all connected to each other, wheeling through the kitchen together, around the hallways and up into the lounges, where they parked up into the larger lounge, suddenly resting, where the room had felt cramped before. And now all the children were gathered inside, and all the bags, it felt much more cramped. And they all began searching around for their gift bags, looking for the name of them on their labels. "Don't bother with the unpacking yet. Do it after we've had something to drink together," asked visitor Aunt Tora, shouting down the hall to the children. The mother was there, following the curious children along, behind them. It was unclear who this order was aimed at, though. Mr. Porter had no time to really ask anything about it. The unknown visitor was then introducing himself to Mr. Porter. He'd walked in alongside the mother. They were both pulling the long train of carriages that were the carriage of suitcases, wheeling them into the house as a couple together. Mr. Porter looked up and down the mother's new friend that she'd invited, introducing himself to him as a retired porter, a senior porter, at the kitchen table where they were all sat, telling him his public names, professions, and where his public house was too. Mr. Porter announced that he was just known as Senile Porter now. Tora had said, she knew a sea lion in her day, and a seesaw, and a seashell too, years ago though. But she said that she never really knew a sea cur, just a seashore, and a seashell, of course, a long time ago. But others just called him Cur for short, not sea cur, not anymore, not in public, just Cur for short. He'd been known as Cur, short for curtains, because he was also Mr. Curtains years ago. He'd worked in curtains for a long time before he'd done his portering. So technically he was Mr. Curtains as well as Mr. Porter. He'd become Mr. Porter long after he'd been Mr. Curtains. He'd had a profession in curtaining, in designing fabrics of different sorts and sizes, and shaping them up for the theatre, for various set designs, working with the actors and the set designers themselves to prepare different curtains for different scene placements. That was his job for many years as a curtainer, producing, making, adapting and redesigning the curtains according to the different needs of the theatre producers. But he'd long since retired from that, long ago. He hadn't been Mr. Curtains, or really Mr. Porter, not in a long time. Just called himself Cur, or Seeker Porter now. Seeker Porter and a little curtainer. Seeker Porter Curtainer was his real fully name, but never really introduced himself as that. No, not anymore, because he wasn't curtainer, wasn't porterer, not anymore, not since retirement. So he just really called himself Seeker, or C for short, really. Others called him Cur, just for short, in public. The younger child that had still been present when the adults were at the kitchen table introducing themselves, not interested in the aunt's gifts, although Aunt Tora came to visit with her gifts quite often. The younger child remained with the elders out of curiosity about what they were saying at the kitchen table. Said he was Mr. She called him Mr. only. And he had to explain that Mr. was just one of his titles, just one of his names. And the unknown visitor revealed that he too was also a Mr. That was just one of his names too, though. He was a Mr. Noah. That was his name he introduced to the child, although Aunt Tora and the other had known it. The elderly man also grew to know it too. Mr. Noah, he described himself as Mr. Dreamer, Thinker. He was a Mr. Noah Dreamer, Thinker. Well, he'd done those things for a long time. She could just call him Dreamer, Mr. Dreamer, if he wanted to. Or Noah, just for short, if she preferred. He announced his own names coolly, introducing himself to the older man and the younger child, more than Aunt Tora, who'd known him from previous visits. A young man to Kerr, and to Aunt Tor as well. The young child sat with them, said it was just too many names of two, even though there were only two of them. She couldn't learn all of their names at such a short time. Why were there two Misters? Why did they both have to call themselves Mister at all? Wasn't that just confusing things? But then Aunt Tora said lots of people share the same names. That was quite common. It didn't have to be confusing at all because they had other names that were quite different from each other, and that they were both Mr. like millions of other people were too. And there was nothing confusing about it at all because they all shared something in common to have that same name in common. Carefully explained Aunt Tora, just one of the aunts that visited regularly though. But it was one of the aunts that the child knew and responded to more, because she knew her better. Aunt Tora told her, why not draw pictures of all the different names? Because that helps her to remember what they are, if she's got a visual reminder of what the names mean. One of the visitors, the older friend visitors who'd been listening in, suggested, if Tor and Kerr were to ever merge, then they could become the Tor Kerrs. If they actually merged their names together, like some people do when they have a merger. And a few of them had laughed. Aunt Tora certainly hackled away with her long, deep, feminine laugh, but it wasn't sure if that was just an act. While the older man, Mr. Tor, he decided not to laugh and reserved any real reaction to it, remaining a little muted. Nevertheless, the visitor had tried to mean well and make a joke of it. Their mutual friend had said in the after-dinner private chat, though the closer friend and the sister of them, the mother figure, she had said she doubted that either of them would ever choose to merge names, whoever they met with. She doubted that they would ever want to do a full merger, because she knew Sister Tora really well, and full mergers had never worked out for her, only ever partly merging her name and her profession and her interests. She really didn't feel that Sister Tora or her new friend, Mr. Tor, she didn't feel either of them would ever do a full merger, or needed it, really. That was really just a joke. She'd said it only just as a joke, she claimed, since she felt they were both far too independent-minded for that to ever happen. Though perhaps, she raised her eyebrows, looking at them both, listening in attentively, in the lounge amongst other people, with all the other adults listening and chatting, as the children busied about themselves, looking at the different gifts that Aunt Tora had brought with her for them, as they were enjoying an after-dinner chat together. Perhaps in time they might feel differently. They might all feel differently, mused the mother, the sister figure, saying it to them all, because maybe they might all learn to become more dependent on each other and merge their names more at some later time. Who knew? People change how they felt, she claimed. Still, it was good to be independent and keep separate names from each other, whilst that was important and required. She said this to the visiting friend, the aunt-sister, who she also knew well, but also said it to Noah, who she was getting to know as a dreamy kind of person. She called him Mr. Dreamer, because he was still a little of a mystery to her too. The children still referred to him as a mister, as a mystery, Mum's friend mystery, or another dreamy friend of Mum's. Out of politeness, those were the terms that they called him, at least. A few of the younger adults called him just Noah or Noe for short, when he got to chat to them more in greater depth later on, until their mother had said it was Noah and not No or Noe or Noe Noah or any of those silly childish names, and Mr. Dreams to the younger children, and not anything other of the ruder names, Dream Farter, as one of them had said, after one too many cases of flatulence. In any case, he'd laughed at it himself, and Noah had said it was all in jest and quite fun, and he really wasn't offended, even though Mr. D really didn't mind. Said that he was used to being called all sorts of different things on the many visits he did. And he knew the mother and the children a little well, from his visits anyway. He was called Noe by a few people, he even commented. And the mother had raised her eyebrows, saying that was a funny expression, and what young funny visitor called him Noe? And he'd said, oh, it was a sister, and a friend of his mother's family. And she was a little confused by the response. Who was this woman to adapt these names to him? Not wanting to dwell on it, though, with the audience around, she'd asked Mr. Kerr to go up to the young adult's room and asked him, the elderly friendly visitor, if he could go up to the older children's room to invite them to the food dance later, that was now nearly ready in the lounge, where the older daughter, young Kit, was still preparing it. They were blocking calls still, and obediently Mr. Kerr Porter ascended to the stairs, going off